What if the oldest records of civilization did not begin with humans at all? Tonight we descend into the clay memory of Sumer, where broken tablets whisper of rulers who came before the familiar shape of history. In the quiet archives of the British Museum, and in the long work of scholars at institutions such as Oxford and Yale, these fragments have been copied, translated, compared, doubted, and returned to again. They do not give easy answers. They offer something stranger, a timeline where kingship appears before ordinary human society can fully explain itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, share where you are watching from and what the local time is where you are. Somewhere, someone else is listening in darkness too, following the same ancient trail. You begin not with a battlefield at Dor, or a palace, Dissa, or a named emperor, Dor. You begin with clay, soft brown clay, pressed flat by human hands, marked with a reed stylus, dried beneath a fierce Mesopotamian sun. The marks are small. They look almost like bird tracks or rain cuts in river mud. Yet inside them waits one of the oldest attempts to organise memory. Not memory as a story told beside a fire, but memory as record, sequence, authority, and time. The Sumerians lived in the land between rivers, where the Tigris and Euphrates spread life across a flat and glittering plain. Their cities rose from reeds, mud brick, labour, prayer, and astonishing patience. Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash, Kish. These names now sound like stones dropped into a deep well. They fall slowly. They echo for a long time. Records confirm that Sumerian writing appeared more than 5,000 years ago, first shaped by accounting, trade, offerings, and administration. Very romantic. Of course, humanity invents writing, and the first thing it does is keep receipts. Even in the ancient world, someone had to know how much barley was missing. But there is another side to these records. When scribes began to list rulers, cities, and dynasties, they did not begin where modern history feels comfortable. They did not simply say that one ambitious chief defeated another, gathered grain, raised walls, and called himself king. Instead, one famous tradition states that kingship descended from heaven, not that a man invented it, not that a council approved it, not that farmers voted on it during a peaceful afternoon near the irrigation canal. Kingship descended. That phrase is quiet, but it is heavy. It suggests authority arriving from above, from beyond, from a divine order older than the city itself. You can almost feel the scribe pausing over the clay, not inventing a fantasy for amusement, but preserving a structure he believes has always been true. Your mind drifts toward a dim tablet room. The air smells of dust, lamp oil, and baked earth. Shelves hold records of animals, rations, workers, temples, lawsuits, fields, and offerings. Then, among them, there is a list of kings whose reigns stretch beyond ordinary life. Not decades, not even centuries, tens of thousands of years. This is where the calm surface of history begins to ripple. The Sumerian King List, preserved in several versions, names rulers who governed before a great flood. Their cities shift across the plain like stars in a ritual map. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sipar, Shuruppak. The names arrive with dignity, then carry reign so immense that the modern mind hesitates. A king ruling for 28,800 years, another for 36,000 years, another still for more than 40,000. It is easy to smile at such numbers. It is easy to close the door and say, myth. Perhaps that is partly true. Perhaps it is entirely true. Yet myth is not the opposite of meaning. Myth is often how ancient societies placed memory inside a sacred frame, so that what mattered would not vanish. A quiet, scholarly debate continues around these strange reigns. Some researchers read them as symbolic numbers rooted in Sumerian mathematics. Others see royal theology, political propaganda, or a ritual way of placing early cities inside cosmic time. A few fringe voices, less cautious and much more dramatic at dinner parties, imagine lost beings, forgotten sciences, or visitors who ruled before humanity knew itself. The tablets do not confirm those claims, but they do preserve the question. Who ruled before us? Not before you and me, in the small personal sense, before us as organised human beings, before written history became a lamp in the dark, before kings became mortal, ordinary, ambitious men with enemies, accountants, and sore feet. The record seems to remember a world divided into two kinds of time. The time before the flood, vast and strange. The time after the flood, where rain shrink, cities struggle, and history begins to feel human for a moment. It feels as though you are standing at the edge of an ancient shoreline. Behind you are modern museums, glass cases, catalogue numbers, university libraries. Careful translations. Before you is a plain under a bronze sky, with temple towers rising like mountain made by hand. Somewhere in the distance, water moves through canals. Somewhere, cattle breathe in the heat. Somewhere, a scribe bends over wet clay and writes down a memory he did not create. The mystery is not only whether those first rulers existed exactly as described, the deeper mystery is why the Sumerians imagined history beginning this way. Why place kingship outside humanity? Why speak of rule as something delivered rather than invented? Why preserve reign so impossible that even ancient readers must have felt their strangeness? Perhaps the answer lies in awe. Early civilization was not a comfortable achievement. It demanded irrigation, obedience, storage, measurement, sacrifice, and trust in systems larger than any single life. Cities were not natural. They had to be imagined before they could be built. To live inside one was to enter a new kind of order. Fields answered to temples, workers answered to overseers, offerings answered to calendars, the heavens answered to ritual, and above it all stood kingship. To the Sumerian mind, such power could not have begun casually. It needed an origin worthy of its weight. So the past opened upward. Authority came down from heaven. Before the human city could speak for itself, the divine assembly had already spoken. The unsettling possibility is not that monsters sat on thrones, or that giants walked calmly through the reed beds. The unsettling possibility is quieter. It is that civilization has always carried a memory of not being first, a sense that human order is borrowed from something older, whether gods, ancestors, stars, mathematics, or the terrifying discipline of nature itself. You listen, and the tablets remain silent. They do not shout. They do not explain everything. They rest in fragments, damaged by time, handled by scholars, surrounded by arguments. Yet their silence has texture. It is the silence of sealed rooms, buried foundations, and names copied long after their first meaning faded. A quirky old tradition even claims that knowledge itself survived catastrophe through hidden writings, as though wisdom could be buried like seed grain before disaster. It may be legend, it may be priestly imagination, still, the image lingers, someone, somewhere, fearing that memory could drown, presses signs into clay. Night deepens around the story. You are not being asked to believe every impossible number. You are not being asked to surrender caution at the temple gate. You are only invited to stand with the first historians of Sumer and notice what they chose to preserve. Before the familiar dynasties, before conquerors and merchants, before the noisy confidence of later empires, they placed a pre-human age of rulers, cities, and heavenly authority that is enough to disturb the dust. Because sometimes the oldest records do not answer our questions. They teach us better questions. They draw a line in clay, then ask you to look behind it, not quickly, not with certainty, slowly, as though your eyes are adjusting to a dark room where something has been waiting for thousands of years. The first clue is simple. History, in Sumer, did not begin with man alone. You stand on the plain of southern Mesopotamia, where the land seems almost too flat to keep secrets. The horizon stretches wide and pale beneath a sky of burning blue. Heat trembles above the ground. Dust gathers at the ankles. Reeds lean in the marsh wind, their dry tips whispering against one another, like old men arguing softly in a temple courtyard. The rivers are near, but they do not roar. They slide through the land with patient power, carrying silt, fish, reeds, and the promise of bread. This is not a landscape that gives life easily. Every field here is negotiated. Every canal is an agreement between human labour and dangerous water. Too little water, and the barley fails. Too much water, and the soil turns bitter. The river is not a gentle friend. It is a ruler without a face, generous in one season, destructive in another. You can understand why ancient people looked at nature and heard command. The air smells of mud, riverweed, animal hide, smoke and grain. In the distance, a settlement rises from the plain. At first, it looks like part of the earth itself. A low swelling of sun-dried brick and trampled paths. Then your eyes adjust, and you see walls, roof lines, courtyards, storage rooms, and the higher shape of a sacred building. It does not gleam like marble, it breathes dust. It is made from the same earth people walk upon, cut into bricks, stacked by hands, repaired again and again. A city is growing here, not a city in the later sense, with polished avenues and imperial statues, but something rawer and more astonishing. A place where families, workers, priests, scribes, herders, brewers, potters, and labour gangs move inside a shared rhythm. Baskets pass from shoulder to shoulder. Donkeys complain with perfect ancient confidence. Children run between walls while adults pretend not to notice, because even civilization cannot fully control children. Records from early Mesopotamian sites show that cities such as Uruk became among the largest urban centres of their age. Excavations led by major archaeological teams have revealed temples, administrative buildings, seal impressions, and vast quantities of pottery. These are not the remains of fantasy. They are the physical bones of organised life. You can almost hear it, the scrape of reed mats, the slap of wet clay, the creak of wooden doors, the soft thud of grain poured into storage jars. A distant chant rises from a temple enclosure, low and measured. No one hurries for your benefit. The whole world seems to move at the pace of heat. Near the canal, men stand knee-deep in brown water, clearing reeds and mud from the channel. Their work is ordinary, but the survival of the city depends on it. A blocked canal can become hunger. A broken levee can become ruin. In such a place, administration is not dull. It is the thin wall between abundance and disaster. That is where the scribes enter. They do not look magical. They look trained, tired, careful, and probably a little superior about it. Their hands are skilled. Their eyes measure everything. They count sheep, jars, workers, fields, bricks, beer, and offerings. The earliest writing grows from this practical world and from the need to remember what human memory cannot safely hold. A stylus presses into soft clay. One mark means a number, another means grain, another marks a person, a place, a duty. Soon, the marks become more flexible. They begin to capture names, actions, lists, laws, hymns, lamentations, and royal claims. A tool made for counting grain becomes a doorway into the ancient mind. There is a quiet irony here. The first archives do not begin as poems about eternity. They begin with management. They begin because someone, somewhere, wants to know who owes barley to whom. Still, Yusur, the clay does not remain humble. Inside the storage rooms and temple offices, a new kind of power gathers. Whoever controls memory controls obligation. Whoever records offerings controls ritual. Whoever lists workers controls labour. The archive becomes more than a pile of tablets, becomes an invisible architecture, holding the city together as firmly as mud brick walls. Your fingers brush a clay tablet, still damp in imagination. It is small enough to hold in one hand. Its surface is crowded with signs. There is no golden glow around it. No dramatic music. No helpful museum label floating in the air. Yet it contains a world, a field boundary, a ration list, a divine name, a human debt. The temple stands above this world of records. Its platform rises gradually, built and rebuilt over generations. The higher it becomes, the more it seems to answer the sky. This is not because ancient builders lacked subtlety. They understood presence. Elevation mattered. To climb was to leave ordinary ground. To approach the shrine was to enter a different layer of existence. The sacred and the administrative were not neatly separated. Modern minds like tidy categories, mostly because modern minds enjoy filing things and then forgetting where they filed them. In ancient Sumer, the temple could be storehouse, workshop, ritual centre, political symbol, and cosmic anchor at once. The smell changes as you approach it. There is incense, cooked grain, wool, oil, sweat it, and thereof the faint mineral scent of sun, baked brick. And attendants move with practised calm. Offerings are prepared, vessels are carried, doors open and close bis. Somewhere within the sacred rooms, a divine statue receives care as though it were a living presence. The god is fed, dressed, honoured, and approached with caution. A mainstream historical fact sits quietly beneath the scene. Mesopotamian temples served as major economic and religious institutions, especially in the earlier city-states. Their power was not symbolic alone, it shaped land, labour, storage, ritual, and social hierarchy, and that matters deeply. Because when Sumerian records speak of rule descending from heaven, the idea does not float in empty myth. It lands in a society already built around temples, offerings, measurements, and sacred administration. The city itself is arranged like an answer to unseen authority. Fields feed the temple. The temple feeds the gods. The gods secure the order that allows fields to exist. At least, that is the hope. A quirky fringe tradition, whispered through later speculation, imagines that hidden chambers beneath temple complexes guarded older wisdom from a forgotten age. There is no firm evidence for such secret libraries under every shrine, but the image has power beneath the public ritual, buried rooms, beneath the city, older memory, beneath human order, something waiting. Scholars continue to debate how early religious authority and political rule became intertwined. Some see temples as engines of economic coordination. Others emphasize kinship groups, trade networks, warfare, or environmental pressure. The truth may not belong to a single explanation. Civilizations rarely rise from one cause. They gather, like silt, layer by layer. You look again at the plain. Nothing here feels simple. The city is not merely a place where people live together. It is a machine for surviving a difficult landscape. It is a ritual map. It is a storehouse of grain and fear. It is a promise that tomorrow can be planned above the rooftops. Birds cross the evening sky, shadows lengthen against the mud brick walls. Workers return from the fields with dust on their skin. Fires begin in courtyards. The canal reflects a strip of fading gold. And somewhere, in a room smelling of clay and smoke, A scribe places one more tablet among thousands. He is not thinking of you. He is thinking of grain, duty, temple accounts, and perhaps the approval of a supervisor with very little sense of humour. Yet his world prepares the ground for something far stranger. The city teaches people to imagine order beyond the individual life. The archive teaches memory to outlive the body. The temple teaches power to descend from the invisible. In this landscape, O Lord. The idea of rulers before humanity does not feel absurd. It feels like the far edge of a system already older than any one person can understand. The canals carry water. The temples carry obligation. The tablets carry memory. And the dust carries everything else. Softly, patiently, until the past is almost hidden again. The tablet does not open like a storybook. It opens like an account. Names appear in order, each attached to a city, each city carrying the weight of a vanished throne. The language is plain, facile, almost severe. It does not pause to explain itself. It does not soften the strangeness for modern ears. It simply states that kingship descended from heaven, and then, as if this were the most reasonable beginning in the world, it names the first places of rule. Eridu receives kingship. That sentence feels small, but it carries a horizon inside it. A city is named as the first holder of royal power, not a wandering camp, not a heroic family, not a warrior standing on a hill with a spear and a very persuasive voice. A city, a sacred place, a settlement already bound a temple, water, ritual, and memory. Then the kings appear. Alulim rules for 28,800 years. Alalga rules for 36,000 years. The numbers are not merely large, they are almost dreamlike. They stretch so far beyond ordinary human life that the mind becomes quiet around them. You do not imagine a man growing old across such a span. You imagine mountains changing shade, rivers shifting course, marshes expanding and shrinking beneath stars that keep returning. The record continues. Kingship moves to Bad Tabira, where 3 rulers hold power for vast ages. Then it moves to Larak, then Sippar, then Shurapak. The pattern is careful. It is not random noise. It has sequence, geography, and structure. A royal power travels from city to city, as though carried in an invisible vessel. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath the mystery. The Sumerian King List survives in several ancient copies, including later Babylonian manuscripts, and scholars have long used it as evidence for how Mesopotamian scribes shaped political memory. The early rulers are clearly not treated the same way as later historical kings. The text creates a deep past, then brings authority forward into a more recognizable world. That difference matters. The pre-flood rulers are not simply old kings with impressive careers. They belong to another scale of existence. Their reigns are measured in units so vast that the ordinary rhythm of birth, aging, and death disappears. They seem less like men and more like markers in sacred time. And yet, their cities are real names. Eridu was excavated. Shurapak was excavated. Uruk, Kish, and other places in the wider tradition left ruins in the ground, not only echoes in myth. This is the unsettling mixture that keeps the record alive. It joins tangible places with impossible durations. It ties mud brick to eternity. It places archaeology and wonder on the same low table, like 2 guests who do not trust each other but refuse to leave. You sit with that discomfort. The tablet's world is not the world of modern chronology. It is not trying to behave like a museum timeline printed in neat ink. It belongs to a culture where numbers, gods, kings, cities, and cosmic order were woven together. A reign could be political memory, could be theology, could be numerical symbolism, could be a way of saying that a city's authority was older than ordinary reckoning. Still, the names have gravity. Alulim of Eridu is not described with a rich personality. No childhood story survives in the list. No favourite meal, no bad habit, no harming little anecdote about misplacing his crown during a festival, although ancient courts surely produced their share of awkward moments. He is almost pure beginning, a name, a city, a reign, the first shadow standing where kingship touches earth. Alalgar follows him, equally distant, then in Menluana, in Mengalana, Dumuzi the shepherdine, and others in the different preserved traditions. Some names resemble divine or legendary figures known from other Sumerian compositions. Dumuzi, especially, becomes associated with shepherding, fertility, loss, and sacred marriage. The King List does not explain these connections, it lets them hover. That is how fragments often speak. They do not give you a complete faith, or they give you an eye, a hand, a broken crown, and ask your imagination to move carefully. Too much confidence, and you distort the past. Too little imagination, and the tablets remain dead clay. A quirky fringe tidbit sometimes attached to these ancient reigns is the claim that the enormous lifespans encode astronomical cycles, not literal years. Some modern enthusiasts have tried to connect the numbers to planetary periods, sacred calendars, or forgotten star knowledge. The evidence is uncertain, and many proposals drift far beyond what the tablets can support. Yet the instinct behind them is understandable. Numbers this strange seem to ask for a hidden key. A quiet scholarly debate continues over the meaning of the numbers themselves. Some specialists argue that they reflect the Sumerian sexagesimal system, a base 60 method of calculation that gave Mesopotamia extraordinary numerical flexibility. Others suggest that the figures honour ancient cities by magnifying their antiquity. Another view sees a deliberate literary contrast between the mythical world before the flood and the reduced human world that follows it. Each explanation opens a door, but none closes the room. The flood itself sits like a blade across the list. The text names the pre-flood rulers, counts their reigns, and that then declares that the flood swept over the land. Everything changes with that sentence. Time narrows, rule resumes, but the proportions are different. Kings still reign, cities still compete, dynasties still rise. Yet the impossible vastness begins to fade. In the imagination, the flood is not only water, it is a break in memory. It is the moment when one kind of time ends and another begins. The rulers before it become unreachable, not because they are merely far away, but because they belong to the other side of catastrophe. Their world has no ordinary ruins you can enter. It has names, numbers, and an ending. You picture a scribe copying the list centuries later. His room is warm, the clay is ready, a master text sits beside him. He knows the signs, he knows the order. Perhaps he understands the tradition better than any modern reader. Perhaps he does not. Perhaps he copies faithfully because the old sequence carries authority. Even when its meaning has become difficult, he writes of reigns longer than empires. He writes of cities that received kingship as though it were a sacred flame. He writes of a flood that interrupts everything. He is not asking whether you believe him. He is preserving a framework in which the human past is not small, not simple, and not entirely human in origin. The calm terror of the King List lies there. It does not present a monster. It presents administration. It does not roar about lost worlds. It files them. The impossible is not shouted. It is itemized. One king, one city, one reign, then another, until the mind feels the pressure of ages, stacked like bricks beneath the plain. Who ruled before ordinary human histories? The tablet answers with names that are almost too old to touch. It offers Eridu, Bad Tibera, Larak, Sipar and Shurapak. It offers rulers whose years behave like symbols carved from the night sky. It offers a flood, and then silence shaped like memory. And perhaps that is why the list still holds power. It makes the beginning of civilization feel less like a sunrise, and more like the lifting of a curtain. As something is already on the stage. Someone has already arranged the throne. The audience arrives late, blinking in the dark. While the record calmly insists that the first act is gone, Eridu rises from the plain like a memory half buried in salt and dust. You approach it at the edge of day, when the heat begins to loosen its grip and the light turns the colour of old honey. The wind moves low across the ground, carrying the smell of dry reeds, river mud, and distant marsh water. There is no great stone gate waiting for you. No proud avenue of marble, no shining palace announcing itself to the horizon. There is earth, layer upon layer of earth. That is the first lesson Eridu gives. The oldest sacred places do not always look grand when time has finished with them. They look tired, they look low, they look almost asleep. Yet under those worn rises lie the remains of repeated building, each generation placing its shrine over the last, as though holiness could accumulate like silt. In Sumerian tradition, Eridu was not just another city. It was remembered as the first place where kingship settled upon the world. Its name carried the weight of beginnings. It belonged to Enki, lord of deep waters, wisdom, craft, creation, and the hidden sweet water believed to flow beneath the earth. In a land where survival depended on canals and wells, such a god was not decorative, he was necessary. The ground itself seems to understand this. You walk across cracked soil where ancient feet once passed toward a shrine. The brick is gone in places, softened into dust. Yet the pattern remains, faint but stubborn. Archaeologists found at Eridu a long sequence of temple levels, one built above another across many centuries. This steady rebuilding suggests a sacred importance that endured from the earliest village phases into the age of cities. A place can become holy through repetition. One offering becomes 10, 10 become generations, generations become identity. Then, long after the first builders are nameless, people say the god has always been there. Perhaps that is how sacred geography is born, slowly, quietly, with mud on the hands and prayers in the throat. You pause near the imagined temple precinct. The air is still. Inside the shrine, the god is not an idea in the modern sense. He is presence. His house must be maintained. His meals must be prepared. His statue must be washed, dressed, and honoured. The line between divine and material life is thin here. The god owns fields. The god receives grain. The god's household has workers, storage rooms, and responsibilities. Worship is not merely a passion, it is administration made sacred. There is something almost unsettling in that order. Modern people often expect ancient religion to float in a mist of symbols. Eridu suggests something denser. A divine house required labour, and labour required records. Fields required canals, and canals required coordination, wisdom. In this world, it was not only hidden in heavenly speech, it was also hidden in knowing when to open a water channel. Enki, the divine patron of Eridu, fits this landscape with quiet precision. He is associated with the deep freshwater abyss, the unseen source beneath visible life. The rivers glitter on the surface, but the sacred imagination looks downward, into hidden waters. It is a beautiful reversal. In Eridu, power descends from heaven, yet wisdom rises from below. You can feel the symbolism gathering. Above, the pale sky. Beneath, the secret water. Between them, the city, fragile, planned, and human. Kingship may arrive from the divine realm, but civilization survives only if water can be guided through mud. A throne without irrigation is only furniture with ambition. A quirky fringe tradition sometimes imagines Eridu as a memory of an even older settlement, one whose knowledge came from beings linked with water. Later Mesopotamian stories speak of culture bringers from the sea, strange sages who teach humanity crafts and order. Careful scholars treat these tales as mythology, ritual memory, and learned tradition, not literal field reports from fish-tailed professors. Still, the image is wonderfully persistent. Wisdom comes from the deep. Civilization is taught by something that rises from water. The scholarly discussion around Eridu remains rich and cautious. Some researchers emphasize its role as an early religious center, marked by repeated temple construction. Others examine how later scribes may have elevated its status to give sacred depth to political traditions. The debate is not whether Eridu mattered. The debate is how memory transformed its importance into a cosmic beginning. That transformation is the quiet miracle. A settlement becomes a shrine becomes a first city becomes the place where rule begins. Then the story hardens into tradition, copied by scribes who inherit more than facts. They inherit reverence. You imagine the earliest worshippers arriving at dawn. Their sandals press into cool dust. Their baskets hold grain, fish, dates, oil, or small crafted objects. They do not think of themselves as standing inside history's opening scene. People almost never know when they are becoming ancient. They are hungry, worried, hopeful, annoyed by neighbours, and concerned about whether the offering is acceptable. The sacred grows among ordinary concerns. A priest steps through a doorway, a worker repairs a wall, a child watches from behind a reed screen. Above them, birds wheel across the brightening sky. Beyond them, marshes shimmer. The world feels young, not because nothing came earlier, but because memory has not yet become crowded. The city still seems close to the first agreement between people, gods, and land. Eridu's greatness is not loud. It does not depend on armies crossing mountains or kings boasting across carved stone. Its power is older and softer. It is the authority of origin. Other cities may become richer, larger, and more politically forceful, but Eridu keeps the aura of the first foundation, the sacred root below the visible tree. That is why its place in the royal tradition matters. When a text says kingship first appeared at Eridu, it is not simply giving directions on a map. It is placing political authority inside sacred depth. Rule begins where the god of wisdom dwells. Rule begins near hidden waters. Rule begins in a city whose temple was rebuilt again and again, as if each age needed to touch the same beginning. The evening grows cooler. The mound darkens against the sky. The last light catches on tiny fragments of pottery scattered across the ground. Each shard is mute, yet each once belonged to a hand, a meal, an offering, a room, a life. The city is gone, but the idea of Eridu remains strangely alive. It is the place where the human plane touches a larger order. It is not proof of rulers beyond mankind. It is not a simple answer to the old question. It is something more subtle and more durable. It is a sacred stage on which Sumerian memory placed the first descent of authority. In the hush of Eridu, kingship does not feel invented. It feels received. Alulim enters the record without a face. There is no portrait, no carved jawline, no royal statue with calm stone eyes. No palace inscription celebrates his victories. No surviving hymn tells you whether his voice was soft, proud, or cold as river water at dawn. He arrives as a name attached to Eridu, and the silence around him is almost larger than the name itself. That is what makes him powerful. A later king might boast of walls, enemies, horses, tribute, and gods who favoured his spear. Alulim offers none of that. He is not surrounded by battle scenes. He does not stand on captured bodies. He does not raise a cup in triumph while musicians flatter him from the corner. He is simply placed at the beginning of rule, like a dark stone set into the foundation of memory. The scribal tradition gives him a reign of 28,800 years. The number is so immense that it stops behaving like biography. It becomes atmosphere. You cannot picture ordinary seasons passing for that long under one mortal ruler. You picture constellations repeating their slow patterns. You picture river channels wandering across the plain. You picture temple walls rising, sinking, and being raised again by hands whose names have turned to dust. Alulim is less a man than a threshold. Still, the name invites a human image, because the mind dislikes empty thrones. It wants to place someone there. So you imagine a figure standing near the sacred precinct of Eridu, dressed not in later imperial splendour, but in something simpler, older, heavier with ritual meaning. His garment is woven from wool, his hair is arranged with care, his skin holds the heat of the plain, his eyes face a city that still feels close to marsh, reed, water, and beginning. He does not rule with paperwork alone. In the earliest imagination of kingship, the ruler is not merely an administrator. He is mediator. He stands between divine order and human fragility. He receives authority from a realm that no farmer can command, then translates that authority into canals, grain, labour, offerings, and judgment. A crown is never just decoration in such a world. It is a burden polished until it looks beautiful. A mainstream historical fact gives the scene its weight. Scholars from institutions such as the University of Chicago and Oxford have long emphasized that Mesopotamian kingship combined political, religious, and economic responsibilities. The ruler's public image often joined military power, temple service, justice, and cosmic order into one carefully managed identity. Alulim sits at the earliest symbolic edge of that identity. He is not described as a conqueror. He is not even described as a lawgiver. The record does not need him to perform. His position is the message. The first throne is not presented as a prize won by violence. It is presented as a placement within a sacred pattern. That difference changes the mood. You are not watching a clever village chief become dominant through strength. You're watching human society imagine authority as something older than ambition. Rule comes wrapped in destiny. The city does not merely choose a leader. The cosmos permits a throne. The fringe imagination has always loved Alulim for this reason. Some modern speculative writers have treated him as a memory of a non-human governor, a survivor of a vanished age, or even a coded reference to beings who shaped early civilization. These claims move far beyond what the tablets can prove, yet the fascination itself is revealing. When a record places a king at the edge of impossible time, people naturally wonder whether the text is hiding a category that modern history has forgotten how to read. Perhaps that is too much. Perhaps it is not enough. A careful scholarly debate continues around whether Alulim and his companions are mythic figures, symbolic ancestors, city personifications, or names drawn from older oral traditions now lost. Some researchers see them as literary devices that dignify later kingship. Others suspect that ancient names, perhaps belonging to local rulers or cult heroes, were stretched into sacred time by scribal tradition. The answer remains difficult, because the clay preserves order more clearly than explanation. You stand near the imagined throne room. It is not a throne room in the later royal sense, full of polished reliefs and courtiers arranged like obedient furniture. It may be closer to a ritual setting, a sacred administrative space where offerings, decisions, and symbols meet. A raised seat, a staff, a vessel of water, a woven mat, the smell of oil, the low murmur of attendants, the soft drag of sandals across packed earth. power begins quietly. A worker waits with a dispute over irrigation rights. Priest brings news of an offering. A storehouse keeper worries about missing grain and hopes no one asks too many pointed questions. A herdsman complains that another man's animals have wandered into his field. Alulim, if imagined as a ruler at all, must sit inside these ordinary troubles. Cosmic authority still has to deal with livestock. That is the funny little truth beneath the grandeur. Even sacred kingship must touch mud. The most ancient throne on earth still faces practical problems. Water must flow, bread must be measured, people must be persuaded that order is better than chaos, especially when chaos seems to require less paperwork. Yet the Sumerian record lifts Alulim above such daily friction. It gives him an age beyond fatigue. His reign becomes a kind of bridge between divine time and civic time. He belongs to Eridu, but he also exceeds Eridu. His name is local, while his duration is cosmic. That tension is the secret fire of the tradition. A normal king rules a people, Alulim rules the idea of beginning. You feel that idea deepen as night gathers over the plain. The city grows dark except for small lights near doorways and shrine rooms. The marshes breathe beyond the settlement. Insects pulse in the reeds. The stars appear one by one, patient and cold. Under those stars, a ruler with an impossible reign becomes easier to understand, not as a literal body enduring 28,800 years, but as a symbol large enough to hold a civilization's first memory of order. And yet, the question does not vanish. Why name him at all? If the scribes only wanted to say that kingship was ancient, they could have spoken in general terms. Instead, they preserved a name, Alulim. The sound itself is spare, almost ceremonial. It gives the abyss a handle. It lets the mind touch what would otherwise remain shapeless. That is how old records work. They do not always explain the past. Sometimes they give the past a name and leave you alone with it. Alulim remains seated in that silence. Neither proven man nor simple invention. He is the first shadow cast by kingship onto clay. He is a figure of origin, resting where myth, administration, sacred geography, and political memory meet. The throne beneath him is not gold, but it is memory. Oh. Time in Sumer does not behave like the clock beside your bed. It stretches, it falls, it rises in great sacred numbers, then settles back into the counting of sheep, barley, jars, and days of labour. One moment, a tablet records a ration with practical precision. The next, a royal tradition gives a king a reign so vast that ordinary life disappears inside it. You feel the difference immediately. Modern time is narrow, personal and impatient. It asks how many minutes remain, how many years have passed, how quickly something can be finished. Ancient time could be wider. It could belong to gods, cities, rituals, stars, floods, dynasties, and repeating cycles of order and collapse. It did not always ask whether one human body could endure a number. Sometimes it asked what kind of meaning the number carried. A reign of 36,000 years is not a simple duration. It is a chamber. Inside it, the listener stands in darkness and feels scale. The number says that this rule belongs to a time outside ordinary memory. It says that the first kings were not part of the crowded, recognizable world of later politics. It places them in a realm where authority is measured by sacred magnitude rather than by birthdays, bones, and tired knees. The Sumerians were master counters. That is the quiet fact beneath the wonder. Their mathematical system, let's use base 60, a flexible structure still echoed today in the way people divide hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees. This was not primitive confusion. It was sophisticated numerical thought, useful for accounting, astronomy, land measurement, and administrative life. So when ancient scribes used immense numbers, they were not merely unable to count properly, they knew numbers. They lived with numbers, they built institutions on numbers, That makes the enormous reigns more mysterious, not less. A culture capable of careful calculation chose to place impossible durations at the beginning of rule. The question becomes not whether they could count, but why they counted the deep past in such overwhelming measures. Your mind drifts into a schoolroom where young scribes practice signs. The room is warm and close. Clay tablets lie in rows. A teacher watches with the calm severity of someone who has corrected the same mistake for 20 years and expects to correct it for 20 more. Students copy lists of signs, professions, animals, cities, and gods. They learn not only writing but order. They learn how the world is arranged. A number is never just a number there. It is discipline. It is memory. It is hierarchy. It is proof that the mind can hold more than the eye can see. To write a great number is to impose structure on vastness. A quirky fringe idea claims that the pre-human reigns conceal an astronomical code, perhaps tied to cycles of planets, eclipses, or long movements of the heavens. Some enthusiasts search the figures for hidden calendars, lost star maps, or secret intervals known to priestly astronomers. Caution is necessary. The tablets do not hand over such a key, yet the possibility has a certain dreamlike attraction, because Mesopotamian scholars truly did become careful observers of the sky. Night made mathematicians of them. On the flat plain, the heavens opened like an enormous tablet above the earth. Stars rose and vanished. The moon changed shape with elegant regularity. Planets wandered against the fixed lights, slow and bright, as if carrying messages across the dark. To a people who watched seasons, floods, omens, and festivals, the sky was not empty space. It was a record written in fire. The scholarly debate remains delicate. Some researchers interpret the long reigns as symbolic products of sacred mathematics. Others read them as literary markers separating mythic time from human history. A different view suggests that the numbers magnify the prestige of ancient cities, making their rule feel older than rivals could challenge. None of these readings feels foolish. Each touches part of the clay, yet none fully drains the strangeness away. Even when you say symbolic, the symbol still demands interpretation. Symbolic of what? Divine order, astronomical cycles, political legitimacy, a lost rhythm of storytelling, a memory of a world so distant that only sacred numbers could hold it. The old scribes do not answer in your preferred format. They do not provide a footnote. They do not pause to say, "Dear future listener, please understand that these years are metaphorical. Ancient scribes were inconsiderate that way. They left civilization a puzzle, then disappeared into dust. Still, the structure offers clues. The numbers often fit within the logic of large Mesopotamian units. They are not random exaggerations thrown wildly onto clay. They have shape. They possess mathematical dignity. This suggests that the list was composed within a learned environment, not whispered carelessly by someone trying to impress a sleepy crowd after too much date beer. There is a deep calm in that realization. The impossible years were curated. Someone selected them. Someone copied them. Someone believed that this was the correct way to place the earliest rulers inside time. You imagine a priestly scholar at dusk, seated beneath a roof of reeds. A lamp flickers beside him. Outside, the city cools slowly. He is thinking not as a modern biographer, but as a guardian of meaningful order. To him, the first rulers do not belong in ordinary years. Ordinary years are 4 harvests, repairs, debts, marriages, illnesses, and aging bodies. The first rulers belong to a time closer to divine arrangement. Their scale must show that distance. Perhaps this is why the enormous reigns feel strangely peaceful. They are not frantic. They do not rush. They invite the mind to slow down until it can almost sense another rhythm of history. Not the quick pulse of individual life, but the long breathing of institutions, landscapes, and myths. You breathe with it for a moment. A city may outlive a person, A tradition may outlive a city, a number may outlive a tradition, even when its first meaning is lost. At last, the number remains on clay, smooth and silent, waiting for strangers to argue over it under electric lights thousands of years later. There is something tender in that. Time has swallowed the scribes, the kings, the temples, the offerings, and the voices that explained everything clearly. Yet it did not swallow the numbers. They remain absurd and solemn, like great stone doors set into the wall of the past. To read them only as mistakes would be lazy. To read them only as literal truth would be reckless. The wiser path moves stonily between those cliffs. It allows the numbers to remain what they are, signs of a worldview where rule, heaven, cities and time were braided together. They may not measure human lifespan, they may measure distance from the ordinary. The old reigns are too long for a man, they are just long enough for a mystery. The divine assembly gathers in a room made of imagination, incense, and fear. You cannot enter it through a doorway. No traveller finds it by crossing a canal or climbing a temple stair. Yet in Sumerian thought, the assembly is real in the way law is real, in the way hunger is real, in the way a royal command becomes real when men begin moving stones at dawn. The gods do not appear as distant ornaments. They govern, they decide fates, assign powers, guard cities, demand offerings, release storms, withhold rain, bless kings, abandon kings, and watch the fragile order of the world. Their authority is not soft decoration painted over human politics. It is the hidden machinery beneath politics, the sacred structure that makes rule meaningful. You feel the atmosphere change. The temple courtyard is quiet under a pale morning sky. Smoke rises from a brazier. Barley cakes rest on a low table. A priest lifts water in a polished vessel, and the surface trembles like a small captured moon. Somewhere, a singer begins a hymn in a voice trained to move slowly, because gods are not rushed by the impatient lungs. In the Sumerian world, each great city stood under divine protection. Uruk belonged especially to Inanna, Nippur belonged to Enlil, Eridu belonged to Enki, belonged to Nanna, the moon god. These names were not simple labels, they formed a sacred geography, a map of power spread across the plain. A mainstream historical fact gives this sacred map its foundation. Archaeologists and Assyriologists have shown that Mesopotamian city-states were deeply tied to patron deities, whose temples shaped political identity, economic life, and public ritual. A city was not merely governed by people, it was imagined as belonging to a god. That idea changes everything. If a city belongs to a god, then human authority becomes borrowed. The king does not own power in the modern sense. He holds it, performs it, and must continually prove that divine order still flows through him. A throne becomes a sacred loan with very strict repayment terms. Offerings help, victories help, good harvests help even more. No ruler wants the gods reviewing his performance during a drought. The divine assembly appears in myths as a council of mighty beings who speak, argue, assign destinies, and sometimes behave with alarmingly familiar emotions. They are majestic, yes, but they are also jealous, strategic, offended, generous, weary, and occasionally dramatic. Ancient gods rarely suffer from a lack of personality. This makes them strangely close. They stand above humanity, yet they mirror human institutions. They have ranks, households, messengers, decisions, feasts, rivalries, and rules. The divine world resembles an enormous court, where cosmic matters are handled through ritual speech and political balance. Heaven, in this imagination, is not empty blue space, It is administration raised to sacred scale. Your mind drifts into a great unseen hall. Enlil sits with the force of command, his presence heavy as storm air. Enki listens with the depth of the hidden water. Clever and difficult to trap, Anu holds a higher, more remote authority, like the dark height of the sky itself. Inanna burns with beauty, danger, and royal energy. Nana marks time with the calm face of the moon. Around them, lesser divine beings move like attendants in a palace too old for stone. The Sumerian word, often translated as fate, carries a weight deeper than simple destiny. It suggests decrees, powers, assignments, and the proper arrangement of existence. To hold or distribute such powers is to control what a thing can be. A city, a craft, a river, a crown, even a human life may depend upon the divine ordering of these sacred forces. A quirky fringe tidbit grows from this idea. Some modern speculators have imagined the divine assembly as a distorted memory of an ancient ruling council, perhaps a group of advanced beings who organized early humanity. The evidence does not require that reading. Still, the resemblance between divine councils and human aristocracies has tempted many restless minds. Even heaven, they say, looks suspiciously well managed. Care is needed there. The safer reading is also fascinating. Human beings often imagine the unseen world through familiar structures, because power becomes understandable when placed inside a court, council, household, or city. The gods may resemble administrators because administration has become one of the defining experiences of civilization. Yet the mirror might work both ways. Perhaps earthly administration gained dignity by resembling divine order. Perhaps scribes, priests, and kings looked upward to justify the systems growing around them. A storeroom could feel sacred if the god's estate depended on it. A ruler could seem necessary if the divine assembly had chosen him. A law could appear older than argument if it echoed cosmic decree. An open scholarly debate continues over how much Mesopotamian religion reflected political life, and how much political life was shaped by the religious imagination. Some scholars emphasize the temple economy and public ritual. Others focus on royal ideology, mythic literature, and the ways scribes organized inherited traditions. The boundary is difficult, because in Sumer the sacred and civic world constantly touch. You sense that contact in small details. A seal is rolled across damp clay, leaving an image of worship. A worker receives grain from a temple storehouse. A priest recites a hymn that also affirms the status of a city. A king repairs a shrine and describes the work as obedience to divine command. These acts are practical, but they glow faintly with cosmic meaning. Nothing is merely itself. A brick is part of a temple is part of a city belongs to a god sits within a divine assembly. The assembly guards the order of the world. The whole structure rises quietly from mud to heaven, one relationship at a time. This is why the pre-human age in Sumerian memory feels organized rather than wild. It is not a chaos of monsters wandering under strange stars. It is a ruled cosmos. The oldest powers are not only stronger than humans, they are more deeply placed inside order. They administer existence itself, while humanity appears as a later, smaller participant in a vast sacred economy. The thought is humbling. You stand beneath the temple wall, hearing the low chant fade into the bright air. The gods are invisible, but their system is everywhere. It lives in field boundaries, ritual calendars, royal titles, storage jars, hymns, and fear of disorder. It lives in the belief that life must be maintained through service. Above the city, the sky is empty to the eye. To the Sumerian mind, it is crowded with decision. Kingship in Sumer is not only a man on a throne. It is a system of doors, seals, granaries, shrines, canals, offices, festivals, and careful words spoken at the right moment. It is a web stretched across the city, almost invisible when it works, painfully visible when it fails. You do not see it by staring only at the king, you see it by watching everyone who must move when the king is named. A messenger crosses a courtyard with a clay tablet in his hand. A priest checks the ritual calendar. A scribe presses a seal into damp clay. A foreman counts labourers assigned to a canal bank. A brewer delivers jars for a festival, because even sacred order apparently requires excellent beer. The city breathes through these actions. Each task seems small, but together they create authority. Kingship does not float above ordinary life. It enters through grain rations, wall repairs, water schedules, oath ceremonies, and offerings carried through temple gates. The ruler may stand at the centre, yet the centre is held up by many hands. You walk through an administrative quarter near the temple. The walls are thick, made of mud brick warmed by the sun. Narrow rooms open into courtyards, storage jars lean in shadow, bundles of reeds rest against a wall. The air smells of clay, wool, oil, and old grain. On a low bench, a scribe shapes a small tablet, then marks it with signs that turn movement into memory. This is where power becomes durable. A spoken command fades. A recorded command waits. It can be carried, stored, checked, copied, and used against someone who suddenly claims he never received those sheep. Writing gives authority a second body, one made of clay. A mainstream historical fact anchors this hidden structure. Excavations across Mesopotamia have uncovered thousands of administrative tablets, cylinder seals, seal impressions, and ration records. These objects show that early cities depended on complex systems of accounting, labour management, temple estates, and official oversight. The king exists inside that machinery. He is not merely a heroic figure, though later songs may polish him into one. He is the visible face of a much larger order. The temple owns fields, the palace organises labour, priests guard ritual knowledge, scribes preserve accounts. Elders and assemblies may still matter in local decisions, merchants move goods, workers build, dig, harvest, haul and repair. Everyone is inside the pattern. At the highest level, kingship claims divine approval. At the lowest level, someone must still count baskets of barley. The distance between heaven and storehouse is shorter than it seems. A god's command may become a royal order may become a work gang may become a canal may become bread, and bread is persuasive. This is the quiet genius of early rule. It links survival to authority, until obedience feels less like surrender and more like participation in a necessary world. The city asks for labour, but it also promises protection, irrigation, ritual meaning, storage, and identity. It says, stay inside the pattern, and chaos may remain outside the wall. Of course, chaos is never very obedient. Floods arrive, crops fail, enemies raid, families quarrel, officials cheat, workers grumble, donkeys refuse to appreciate civilization. The system must constantly renew itself, because order is not a possession. It is a performance repeated day after day. Festivals become part of that renewal. You imagine a sacred procession moving through the city. The god statue is carried with care, or musicians play, or priests chant. People gather along the route, not as a modern crowd seeking entertainment, but as witnesses to cosmic maintenance. The divine presence moves through human streets. The city sees itself reflected in ritual. The king may appear in such ceremonies as servant of the gods, builder of temples, protector of justice, or chosen shepherd of the people, that image matters. A ruler who can stand near the divine statue without seeming rejected by heaven has already won part of the political argument. A quirky fringed tidbit surrounds certain Mesopotamian royal symbols. Some modern writers have imagined the measuring rod, ring, and staff shown in ancient art as fragments of lost technology, tools of advanced rule disguised as ritual objects. The careful reading is simpler and stronger. These symbols likely express authority, justice, measurement, and legitimate order. Still, the fringe interpretation reveals something important. Ancient regalia looks powerful because it is designed to make power visible. Symbols are instruments too. A crown changes how people see a head, a staff changes how they see a hand, a seal changes how they see clay, a temple stair changes how they see height. Kingship survives by turning signs into belief. The scholarly debate remains open around the balance between temple and palace power in early Sumer. Some historians emphasize the temple as the original organizing force, managing land, labor, and ritual. Others argue that palatial authority, military leadership, and elite households played a larger role than older models allowed. Many now favor a more complex picture, where sacred and secular power develop together in changing proportions. That uncertainty is useful. It prevents the past from becoming too neat. Sumer was not a diagram. It was a living world of competing interests, sacred claims, local traditions, and practical necessities. Kingship may have descended from heaven in the language of memory, but on earth it had to negotiate with mud, hunger, ambition, and time. You enter a room where seal impressions dry beside tablets. The cylinder seal is small, almost intimate. Yet when rolled across wet clay, it creates an image that can bind a transaction or mark a container as official. A tiny carved stone becomes a portable authority. It is art, signature, protection, and warning at once. Do not break this seal. Do not deny this record. Do not pretend the system cannot see you. There is something quietly unsettling about that. Civilization remembers. It watches through records. It turns people into names, duties, quantities, and obligations. The same invention that preserves hymns also preserves debt. The same archive that keeps sacred memory also keeps lists of workers who received less barley than they probably wanted. You feel the double nature of kingship here. It gives form to community, but it also gathers control. It protects against disorder, but it creates hierarchy. It connects the human city to divine order, but it also gives certain humans the right to speak for that order. That is a dangerous gift. The ancient system depends on belief, labour, and repetition. No single king can embody it completely. He must be supported by scribes who record, priests who legitimize, workers who obey, soldiers who enforce, and stories that make the arrangement feel ancient. Without those layers, the throne is only a raised seat in a hot room. With them, it becomes destiny. So the hidden system of kingship is not hidden because it was secret. It is hidden because it was everywhere. It lived in gestures, buildings, tablets, offerings, zeals, titles, festivals, and daily habits. It shaped the city so completely that people could mistake it for the natural order of the world. And perhaps that is the deepest power of any ancient throne. It teaches a society to feel governed even when the ruler is nowhere in sight. Humanity enters the oldest Mesopotamian imagination not as a crowned wonder, but as a solution. That is the unsettling softness of it. You may want the human story to begin with glory, with a sunrise on the first mind, with a noble creature opening its eyes and discovering the stars. The ancient texts often move differently. They place humanity inside labour, need, and divine inconvenience. The gods have work to do. The canals must be maintained. The fields must produce. Offerings must be prepared. Temples must be served. The world, even in sacred imagination, does not maintain itself for free. Someone must carry the basket. Someone must shape the brick. Someone must grind the grain until the arms ache and the night feels very far away. In several Mesopotamian traditions, humanity is created to relieve the gods of toil. This idea appears with particular force in later Akkadian compositions, while Sumerian traditions also connect human existence with divine planning. Earth, breath, and service. The details vary, but the mood remains strangely consistent. Humans are not merely observers of creation, they are workers inside it. You sit with that thought. Outside the temple, dawn spreads slowly over the plain. A line of labourers moves toward the canal, their baskets swinging from tired shoulders. The ground is cool for only a little while. Soon the sun will rise higher, and the mud will cling, and the day will become a long negotiation with heat. This is where creation becomes practical. A mythic statement about human purpose reflects a social world where labour is constant and visible. Civilization requires work that never ends. Irrigation channels collapse, storehouses empty, bricks crack, animals wander, grain must be cut, hauled, counted, and stored. The gods may be eternal, but the fields still require hands. A mainstream historical fact gives this theme a firm base. Ancient Mesopotamian economies depended heavily on organized labor for irrigation agriculture, temple estates, construction, and food production. The scale of early urban life made coordinated work essential, not optional. The creation stories make that necessity sacred. You imagine a divine chamber where the problem is discussed with weary seriousness. The gods desire rest. The land demands maintenance. A new being is proposed, shaped from clay, animated by divine intention, and set into the world between animal and god. Not equal to the divine, not outside the sacred order, useful, fragile, clever, noisy, and dangerously good at multiplying. That last part becomes a problem. Some myths do not portray humans as peaceful servants forever singing gratitude. They become numerous, they become loud. Their presence disturbs the divine realm. Humanity is both necessary and troubling, both solution and a complication. In other words, even though the gods discover what every city administrator eventually learns, people are hard to manage. A quiet smile belongs there. The first humans are created to ease labour, and then create entirely new administrative headaches. It may be one of the most believable ideas in ancient literature. A quirky fringe tidbit often grows around the phrase first human design. Modern speculative writers sometimes read Mesopotamian creation scenes as memories of deliberate biological engineering, especially when clay, blood, breath, or divine material appears in the stories. The evidence does not require such a conclusion. These elements belong deeply to mythic language, ritual symbolism, and ancient ideas about life. Still, the fascination reveals a modern hunger to read old creation stories as hidden technology. The texts themselves are more mysterious than that. Clay is not just material, sisobuo. It is the substance of the plain, the matter beneath feet, walls, tablets, jars, and graves. To shape a human from clay is to bind humanity to the land. It is to say that people belong to the same earth they cultivate, write upon, and eventually return to in silence. You feel that connection in your hands. Wet clay is cool. It resists and yields. It remembers pressure. A thumb leaves a hollow. A reed leaves a mark. A potter's palm can raise a vessel from shapeless mud. A scribe's stylus can raise memory from the same substance. In such a world, to imagine the first human shaped from clay is not childish. It is intimate. The scholarly debate around Mesopotamian creation traditions remains subtle. Some historians emphasize social reflection, seeing myths as sacred explanations for labor hierarchy and temple service. Others focus on ritual theology, in which humans maintain the gods through offerings and proper order. Another approach studies how stories changed across Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian settings as cities, empires, and priesthoods reshaped inherited memory. The debate matters because no single text owns the human beginning. There are fragments, versions, themes, and transformations. One tradition says people were shaped for service, another lingers on wisdom, divine craft, or the ordering of the world. Another warns that humans, once created, bring noise, excess, and divine irritation. The ancient imagination does not give a clean modern doctrine. It gives a field of possibilities. That field is more honest than certainty. Human beings are servants, but also worshippers, workers, but also singers, clays, but also breath, dependent, yet capable of building cities so immense that later generations mistake their ruins for natural hills. The myths diminish humanity and elevate humanity at the same time. You walk beside the canals, morning strengthens. A woman carries a jar against her hip. A man repairs a reed fence with slow but practiced movements. Children press small shapes into wet mud near a doorway, playing at creation without knowing it. A priest's assistant hurries past with offerings wrapped in cloth. The world smells of water, animals, smoke, and bread beginning to bake. Here, the human purpose is not abstract. It is lived through bodies. Knees bend, hands lift, back strain, voices call across fields. Someone complains about a supervisor, someone laughs, someone steals a moment of shade and calls it divine mercy, which seems fair enough. The idea that humans were created for labor can sound bleak, yet there is another layer beneath it. Service in Mesopotamian thought is not meaningless drudgery alone. It is participation in cosmic maintenance. To feed the gods, maintain temples, farm fields, and keep order is to help existence continue. The human being is small, yes, but not irrelevant. Small things can hold worlds together. A bowl of grain placed in a shrine, a canal cleared at sunrise, a tablet marked accurately, a hymn sung at the correct hour. These gestures create continuity between heaven, city, and soil. Humanity is not the origin of the system. Humanity becomes its caretaker, its servant, and sometimes its most unpredictable element. That may be the oldest unease. If humans were made to serve an order older than themselves, then freedom begins inside obligation. If people were shaped from clay, then thought rises from mud. If the gods needed human labor, then even divine worlds depended on fragile hands. The human name begins there. In service and dust, not triumphant, not worthless, necessary, clay remembers, but never perfectly. That is the sorrow hidden inside every ancient archive. A tablet can survive fire, burial, collapse, conquest, and thousands of years of silence. Yet it may lose one corner, one line, one name, one number. And suddenly a door in history stands half open with darkness breathing on the other side. You enter a storage room where memory has become dust. The shelves are gone, but you imagine them crowded with tablets. Some are small enough to rest in the palm. Others are larger, heavier, shaped for lists, hymns, contracts, offerings, royal names, and temple records. They were never meant to become sacred museum objects. They were tools, handled by working people who expected them to serve a purpose. A tablet might be dried in the sun for temporary use, another might be fired harder, by accident or intention, and survive like a stone thought. Many were broken, reused, discarded, or buried beneath floors. Some endured because cities burned, which is a rather dramatic way for an archive to improve its long-term preservation. History has an odd sense of humour. The smell is close and dry. Clay dust, old reed, smoke, the faint mineral scent of earth that has forgotten rain. You kneel beside a fragment and see only part of a sign. Perhaps it was once a royal name. Perhaps it was a measure of grain. Perhaps it belonged to a myth of creation, a temple account, or a school exercise copied by a bored student with aching fingers. The fragment does not explain itself. A mainstream historical fact gives this silence its shape. Modern knowledge of Sumerian literature depends on thousands of clay tablets and fragments recovered from sites across Mesopotamia, many preserved in broken condition. Scholars at major museums and universities reconstruct texts by comparing duplicate copies, sign forms, grammar, and context. This is patient work. Not glamorous, not quick, not the sort of thing that makes a noisy legend happy. Single line may require years of comparison. One broken sign may change a sentence. One missing verb may turn certainty into caution. The ancient world does not return as a complete book. It returns as scattered pages, damp edges, and words half-eaten by time. You picture a modern scholar under white library light. Gloved hands move carefully over a tablet. A camera records the surface. Angled light reveals shallow wedges. A sign that seemed invisible appears for a moment, then disappears when the lamp shifts. The scholar leans closer, not as a treasure hunter, but as a listener. The clay is quiet, still. The silence is not empty. Inside damaged tablets lie lists of kings, hymns to gods, laments for ruined cities, school texts, legal cases, offerings, omens, and myths. They preserve both the grand and the ordinary. One tablet might speak of divine decisions, another might complain about inferior copper. Ancient humanity, it seems, reached eternity and customer dissatisfaction at roughly the same time. That mixture matters. The same archive that holds cosmic imagination also holds receipts, lawsuits, jokes, errors, corrections, and repetition. The world of Sumer is not a clean mythic painting. It is crowded, practical, funny, anxious, and often damaged. Broken memory is still memory, but it must be approached with humility. A quirky fringe tidbit often circles these fragments. Some believe lost tablets once contained complete accounts of hidden timelines, forbidden origins, or knowledge removed by later authorities. There is no solid proof of a vanished master archive that explained everything. Yet the fantasy persists because missing pieces invite longing. When the clay breaks, imagination pours into the crack. That longing is understandable. A fragment gives enough to awaken the mind, but not enough to satisfy it. A king is named, but his story is gone. A god speaks, but the next line is missing. A city receives power, but the surrounding explanation has fallen away. The result feels less like ignorance and more like interruption. You want the sentence to continue. The scholarly debate around these records often concerns how much confidence can be placed in reconstructed texts. Some experts trust repeated copies to reveal stable traditions. Others warn that scribes adapted, edited, taught, and reshaped material across centuries. A text copied in a schoolroom may preserve an old tradition, but also reflect the needs of the schoolroom. That is not a weakness, it is part of the life of memory. Ancient records did not freeze the past in perfect glass. They carried it forward through hands, classrooms, temples, palaces, and changing languages. Each copy could preserve and transform. Each scribe stood between inheritance and interpretation. The tablet was not a dead container. It was an event repeated. You hear the scratch of the stylus. A student copies an old list. His teacher corrects a sign. The room is hot. Someone coughs. A fly circles with pointless confidence. The student does not know that a future world will study his tablet with solemn respect. He only knows that the line must be copied properly, or the teacher will notice. Memory survives through such ordinary pressure, not only through kings, not only through priests, through training, boredom, discipline, habit, and the stubborn human desire not to be wrong in front of a supervisor. The great hidden timelines of antiquity may owe their survival to school exercises as much as sacred devotion. There is something gentle in that. A damaged tablet does not make the past less real. It makes the past more human. It reminds you that history comes through materials that can crack, hands that can slip, languages that can change, and meanings that can dim. Even the oldest mysteries arrive with fingerprints on them. You move deeper into the imagined archive. Some tablets are arranged by type, others lie fallen. A few are scorched black. Many are broken into pieces that no longer fit together. The room feels like a mind after a dream, holding images without sequence. Water, kings, heaven, labour, flood, clay, names. The ancient record is not a straight road. It is a field of fragments under moonlight. You must step carefully. One path leads towards scholarship, slow and cautious. Another leads towards speculation, bright and unstable. Between them is a narrow way where wonder survives without pretending to know more than the evidence allows. That is where the tablets ask you to remain. Not cold, not gullible, awake, but quiet. The broken clay does not prove every legend. It does not surrender the full pre-human age. It gives glimpses, patterns, repeated phrases, sacred numbers, and damaged names. It lets the oldest storytellers speak through missing lines, and sometimes the missing line is the most powerful part. Because when memory breaks, silence becomes part of the record. It surrounds each surviving sign like night around a lamp. It tells you that the ancient world was larger than what remains, and that every preserved tablet is only a small island in a drowned landscape of words. Clay remembers, but never completely. So you listen to what survives, and you listen to what is gone. Water enters the story like a judgment that has learned to move slowly. At first, there's only weather, a heaviness in the air, a strange pressure over the marshes. Birds lift from the reeds in scattered lines, uneasy without knowing why. The river surface darkens beneath a sky the colour of bruised bronze. Somewhere, a farmer looks toward the horizon and says nothing. Then the rain begins. It does not arrive as a single dramatic wall. It gathers, thickens, and becomes the world. Drops strike mud brick, channels swell, courtyards shine, roofs leak, storage jars are dragged to higher ground, children are called indoors, animals pull at their ropes with wide, frightened eyes. The old flood traditions of Mesopotamia do not merely describe bad weather, they describe a break in the pattern of existence. In the Sumerian King List, the flood sweeps over the land and the sequence of vast ancient rains ends. Rule continues, but the scale changes. The world is still alive, yet it is not the same world. That is the terrible power of the flood. It divides memory. A mainstream historical fact gives this theme a physical shadow. Archaeologists working in southern Mesopotamia have found flood deposits at several ancient sites, though not one universal layer covering every city at once. These discoveries suggest real destructive flooding shaped local memory, even if the literary flood became larger than any single event. The rivers could do that. The Tigris and Euphrates were not plight lines on a map. They shifted, overflowed, abandoned channels, and remade landscapes. In a flat alluvial plain, water did not need mountains to become terrifying. It only needed persistence. A river could enter a field, a house, a shrine, and a name. You hear it in the dark. Water against walls, water under doors, water carrying reeds, branches, baskets, bodies of animals, broken beams, and the small possessions people thought they had time to save, a mat, a jar, a tools, a child's toy shaped from clay. The flood does not care what is sacred, useful, or loved. In ancient imagination, such devastation demanded explanation. A ruined city could not remain only an accident. A drowned landscape asked why. The gods had decreed it. Humanity had become too loud, too many, too troubling, or too distant from proper order. The flood became not only a disaster, but a decision. That idea is unsettling. It means nature and divine will were not always separated. A storm could be weather, but also message. A flood could be water, but also sentence. The plain itself became a tablet, and catastrophe wrote across it in mud. A quirky fringe tidbit follows this very line. Some modern writers imagine the flood as a memory of a lost global civilization destroyed in one forgotten night. Others connect it to hidden timelines, ancient maps, or warnings preserved by priestly guardians. The evidence remains uncertain, and local floods require no vanished empire to explain them. Still, the persistence of flood stories across cultures keeps the imagination restless. Why does water so often guard the boundary of beginnings? Perhaps because water erases so completely. Fire leaves blackened beams, war leaves weapons and wounds, water smooths the ground, fills rooms, shifts bodies, and buries walls beneath silt. When it withdraws, the familiar world looks newly made and strangely guilty. A scholarly debate continues around how Mesopotamian flood literature relates to actual environmental events, older oral traditions, and later theological storytelling. Some researchers focus on river behaviour and flood deposits. Others study the literary transformation of disaster into cosmic narrative. Another approach sees the flood as a political and religious boundary, separating legendary kings from more historical dynasties. That boundary matters more than its exact depth. The flood is not only an event in the tradition, it is a hinge. On one side stand rulers whose years feel immeasurable. On the other, stand kings who become more human, more limited, more entangled with recognizable history. Time itself seems to pass through the water and come out smaller. You imagine a scribe writing the decisive phrase, "The flood swept over." He does not describe every scream, every roof, every animal lost in the current. He does not need to. The sentence is enough. It moves across the tablet with the calm force of inevitability. Then the list continues, but the old world has vanished behind a line of clay. This is how ancient records often hold trauma. And not through confession, not through long emotional explanation, through formula, sequence, and silence. A few words carry what an entire ruined settlement could not say. The rain slows in your imagination. The land is waterlogged and grey. Dead reeds lie tangled along walls. The smell is heavy, full of mud, rot, wet grain, and extinguished fires. People emerge from higher ground and temples, boats, or whatever shelter endured. They count what remains. They look for names that do not answer. The city must begin again. That may be the deepest reason the flood became central. It explains not only destruction, but continuation. The world was broken, yet kingship returned. Humanity survived, but with a wound inside memory, the old rulers were sealed away, not by argument, but by water. A flood makes absence believable. It tells later people why the earliest age cannot be visited. It sees the evidence is gone because the land itself was washed clean. It places missing history under silt, where the mind can sense it but never fully recover it. There is comfort in that, and danger too. Comfort, because loss receives a shape. Danger, because every missing thing can be imagined beneath the water. A city, a record, a race of kings, a first covenant between gods and earth. The flood becomes a vast hiding place for whatever the present cannot prove. Night settles over the soaked plain. Frogs call from newly formed pools. The stars return, cold and indifferent. A survivor watches their reflection shiver in dark water. Perhaps he feels the gods have not abandoned the world entirely. Perhaps he feels they have come too close. The flood does not end the story. It changes the size of it. Human history resumes with wet feet, damaged walls, and a memory of something larger drowned behind it. The first age recedes into sacred distance. The land dries, the tablets are copied, the names remain, and the water keeps its secret. Ziusudra stands where water becomes memory. He is not introduced as a conqueror. He does not arrive with armies, tribute, or a crown bright enough to blind the poor scribes forced to describe it. He appears as a listener, a survivor, and a fragile vessel for a world that has nearly vanished. Around him, the old order is drowned. Within him, something continues. His name carries the quiet dignity of preservation. In Sumerian tradition, Ziusudra is the righteous figure warned before the Great Flood. He hears what others do not hear. He receives the secret before destruction arrives. That alone makes him unusual, because survival in ancient literature is rarely just luck. It is relationship. It is favour, it is obedience at the moment when obedience looks absurd. You see him in a city under thickening clouds. The streets are damp. The reeds bend low. People move through ordinary routines, because catastrophe often begins while everyone is still worrying about dinner. A woman measures grain, a man repairs a doorway, a child follows a dog through puddles. The sky deepens, but life continues with stubborn innocence. Then comes the warning, not shouted in public, not carved on a shining monument. It arrives privately, wrapped in secrecy, a divine voice, a hidden message, an instruction that separates one whole household from the fate of many. Build, prepare, preserve life. The command is simple enough to understand and terrible enough to obey. A mainstream historical fact anchors the figure. The Sumerian flood story of Ziusudra is one of the oldest surviving versions of the flood survivor tradition, and later Mesopotamian literature reshaped similar material through figures such as Atrahasis and Utnapishtim. The names change, but the structure remains hauntingly familiar. A chosen man hears, a vessel is made, life survives through water. You imagine the building of that vessel not as a polished miracle, but as labour. Wood must be gathered, rope must be twisted, seams must be sealed, animals must be handled, which is never as noble as poetry suggests. One goat can test the spiritual patience of an entire household. The air smells of pitch, wet timber, wool and fear. Ziusudra does not stand outside the human condition. His survival requires hands, tools, timing, and trust. The divine warning may open the path, but a man must still build in the mud. His faith is not a feeling alone. It is a structure large enough to float. That detail matters. Ancient survival is practical. It is not only prayer, it is preparation. A message from the divine world becomes measurements, planks, food stores, frightened animals, and families waiting under a sky that no longer feels safe. A quirky fringe tidbit attaches itself to Ziusudra through later speculation. Some modern writers imagine him as a guardian of lost knowledge, a figure entrusted with seed, memory, and perhaps records from an age erased by water. The surviving texts do not prove hidden libraries packed aboard the vessel. Still, the image is powerful. A flood survivor naturally becomes a keeper of what the flood failed to take. The scholarly debate remains open in quieter ways. Some researchers view Ziusudra as a literary ancestor of later flood heroes. Others study whether his story reflects local flood memories transformed by temple tradition. A further line of discussion asks how kingship, divine judgment, and human responsibility are woven into the survivor's role. Ziusudra is not merely spared, he is positioned. He becomes a hinge between worlds. Behind him lies the drowned age of enormous reigns, sacred kingship, and cities wrapped in impossible time. Around him lies ruin. Ahead of him lies the smaller, more recognizable world where human dynasties struggle under shortened years and heavier uncertainty, yet he carries no easy triumph. Survival is not victory in the ordinary sense. It is quieter. It is lonelier. It asks a person to step from safety into aftermath, where every familiar thing has changed. The city smells wrong. The soil lies under silt. The voices that made a place feel alive are missing. You picture Ziusudra after the waters withdraw, so the vessel rests. The air is cold and wet. Clouds tear open slowly above a pale horizon. Birds test the silence. Mud clings to the feet. The land is both old and new, like a face washed until its scars show more clearly. He offers worship. That gesture is important. It says the world has not become meaningless. Even after terror, ritual resumes where destruction ends. The first act of survival is not boasting, it is recognition. The gods remain, the human being remains. The relationship, however wounded, is renewed. In some traditions, the flood survivor receives extraordinary favour and is granted a distant life beyond ordinary humanity. This raises the mystery around Ziusudra from history into sacred transformation. He does not simply live longer, he crosses into a different condition, as if witnessing the end of an age alters what he is. That idea is deeply ancient. A person who survives what should have ended everything becomes more than a person. He becomes testimony. He is living proof that memory can pass through disaster. His body becomes an archive when clay is broken. Temples have fallen, and fields have disappeared underwater. The old scribes understood this. They did not need to give Ziusudra a loud personality. His importance lies in function. He receives warning, he preserves life, he honours the divine. He stands beyond catastrophe as a witness to the break. He is the human shape of continuity. The rain has stopped. You hear only dripping reeds, distant water, and the soft shifting of animals. The world does not explain itself. It simply waits to be inhabited again, somewhere. A fire must be lit, somewhere. Rain must be dried, somewhere. Children must be told what happened, though no words will be enough. Ziusudra carries that impossible duty. He must remember without drowning in memory. He must begin without pretending there was no ending. He must step into a landscape where every pool might reflect a lost house. Every mud wall might hide a former street. Every quiet morning might feel borrowed. This is why his figure endures. He does not answer who ruled before humanity. He keeps open the wound through which that question passes. The ancient rulers fade behind water, but Ziusudra remains at the edge, looking back toward a world no longer reachable. He is not the first king, he is the last witness. Myth does not stand outside reality like a painted screen. It grows from reality, drinks from it, distorts it, protects it, and sometimes hides it better than any locked door. In Sumer, myth is not childish invention. It is a way of preserving truths too heavy, too sacred, or too uncertain to carry in plain language. You feel this as the tablet room fades into a wider darkness. The clay speaks of gods, floods, impossible rains, and cities favoured by heaven. Modern thought wants to divide these things neatly. This part is history, this part is religion, this part is poetry, this part is politics. The ancient mind was not so obedient to modern filing systems. For Sumerians, the world was layered. A canal could be engineering, survival, ritual duty, and divine gift at once. A king could be a man, a servant of the gods, a military leader, and a sacred symbol. A flood could be river behaviour, collective trauma, divine judgment, and the boundary between worlds. Nothing needed to be only one thing. That is why myth still unsettles. It refuses to stay in its assigned chair. A mainstream historical fact supports this uneasy richness. Scholars of Mesopotamian literature have shown that myths, hymns, royal inscription, and king lists often served religious, political, educational, and cultural functions at the same time. These texts did not merely entertain, they organized memory and explained authority. You imagine a scribe copying an old composition. He is not asking whether the story is true in the same way a court record is true. He is asking whether it belongs to the inherited order of meaning. Does it explain why a city matters? Does it honor a god properly? Does it place kingship within a sacred pattern? Does it teach students the language of civilization? Truth has more than one doorway here. A myth can preserve the memory of a real flood without giving a meteorological report. It can preserve the rise of kingship without naming the first ambitious official who learned to control grain. It can remember social change through divine speech, because divine speech gives change a voice large enough to survive. The hidden danger is not believing too much, it is dismissing too quickly. When modern people hear gods and impossible years, they may turn away, thinking nothing historical remains. Yet, myth can carry social memory like a sealed jar carries water. The jar is shaped by culture. The water inside may still be drawn from a real river. A quirky fringe tidbit grows from this space between symbol and event. Some speculative writers argue that myths are damaged reports of forgotten technologies, vanished teachers, or pre-human rulers hidden beneath divine names. Most scholars do not accept such claims as evidence-based history, yet the persistence of these ideas reveals a real tension. Ancient stories often sound as if they remember more than they explain. That tension is worth keeping, not as proof of secret empires, but as a sign that memory can become strange over time. A real ruler may become a demigod. A catastrophic flood may become world destruction. A city's early importance may become heavenly election. A long cultural process may become a single divine decree. Memory does not simply fade, it transforms. You sit beside an oil lamp as shadows move along a wall. The flame bends, straightens, and bends again. A story told in such light is never only information. It is mood, warning, identity, and inheritance. The listener receives not just events, but a way of feeling the world. In that world, the pre-human era may not mean a literal age without any people at all. It may mean an age outside ordinary human memory. It may mean a sacred time when gods, cities, and kingship were imagined as operating on a scale beyond human life. It may mean the deep past before the human order became recognizable. Or perhaps it means all of these at once. A living myth does not always choose. A careful scholarly debate continues around how to read the earliest royal traditions. Some researchers interpret them as ideological tools, designed to legitimize later dynasties by connecting them to divine origins. Others see inherited mythic structures that preserve fragments of older local traditions. Another view focuses on the psychology of early urban life, where overwhelming social change required stories grand enough to explain it. Each approach has weight. None can claim the entire night. The Sumerian record sits between literature and archive, between sacred imagination and political memory. It does not behave like a modern history book, but it also does not drift free of the real world. It is tied to cities, temples, scribal schools, rituals, and royal claims. It is rooted in institutions that left marks in the ground. The past is not pure fantasy here, it is fantasy fused to brick. That fusion is what gives the old stories their endurance. If the cities were entirely imaginary, the mystery would feel lighter. If the rulers were ordinary and fully documented, the mystery would vanish. Instead, the tradition gives you real places, real tribal habits, real political concerns, and unreal spans of time. It places the believable beside the impossible. Then it waits. You feel the waiting in the spaces between signs, a broken line, a missing corner, a name preserved without explanation. Myth does not answer every question because its task is not always explanation. Sometimes it is preservation. Sometimes it keeps a shape alive until another age can wonder what once filled it. The idea of lost reality begins there, not in wild certainty, but in recognition that ancient people knew things they did not record as we wish they had. They inherited oral memories already old by the time clay received them. They lived among ruins, rebuilt shrines, repeated names, and explained origins through sacred speech. Their own past was already ancient to them. This is easy to forget. To the Sumerians, beginnings were not neat and nearby. They were deep, layered, and charged with divine presence. They looked back and saw not simple ancestors, but a world arranged by powers greater than the city. The first rulers became figures of sacred distance because distance itself needed a language. You listen to that language now. It is not the language of proof alone. It is the language of reverence, anxiety, legitimacy, and wonder. It tells you that civilization did not understand itself as a casual accident. It saw order as something received, maintained, threatened, and remembered through sacred story. Myth is not the enemy of memory. It is memory wearing a mask, and sometimes, when the room is quiet enough, the mask seems almost ready to speak. The question sounds simple until it begins to dissolve in your hands. Who ruled before us? At first, the mind reaches for a figure, a forgotten king, a divine being, a stranger from the sky, a shadow seated on the first throne, watching the plain while human beings are still learning how to gather into cities. The question seems to ask for a name, but ancient records rarely give only one kind of answer. They speak in layers. They let a god look like a ruler look like a god's servant, a city look like a sacred body, and time itself look like a kingdom. To ask who ruled before humanity may not mean asking who wore a crown before human beings existed. It may mean asking what forms of authority shaped the human world before people understood themselves as its authors. That is a quieter question. It is also more unsettling. You walk through a city at dawn, when power is still hidden inside routine. The baker opens a clay oven, the canal worker lifts his tool, the priest prepares water for purification, the scribe smooths the surface of a tablet. The king is nowhere in sight, yet the city is already governed. Something rules here. Calendar rules the festival. River rules the field. Temple rules the offering. Archive rules the debt. Custom rules the family. Fear rules the imagination. The gods rule through all of them, not always as thunder, but as structure. A mainstream historical fact gives this idea strength. Early Mesopotamian civilization was shaped by complex relationships between environment, temple institutions, kinship groups, labor organization, and emerging political authority. Kingship did not arise in an empty world, it grew inside networks of obligation already older than the throne. So what ruled before us, perhaps water did. The rivers decided where settlement could flourish, where grain could grow and where danger waited. They did not issue decrees in human language, but they forced obedience all the same. Build canals or starve, repair levees or drown and learn the seasons or lose everything. In such a land, the first ruler may not have been a person at all, it may have been the river's demand for coordination. Perhaps grain ruled. That sounds humble, almost funny. Yet stored grain can command armies more effectively than poetry. Grain creates surplus, and surplus creates managers. guards, measurements, disputes, wealth, offerings, and dependency. A full storehouse is a quiet throne. People gather around it because hunger is persuasive, and because tomorrow has to be negotiated in advance. Perhaps the dead ruled. Ancestors, burial places, inherited land. And older names can shape the living with invisible pressure. A family does not begin fresh each morning. It wakes beneath expectation. A city, too, carries its dead under floors, in cemeteries, in stories, and in the authority of old foundations. The earliest rulers may have been imagined partly through ancestral memory, enlarged until they stood beyond ordinary time. A quirky fringe tidbit moves through this shadowed space. Some speculative traditions imagine that pre-human rulers were not gods in a symbolic sense, but remnants of an earlier intelligence preserved under divine names. The clay does not prove this. Still, the idea remains popular because it transforms sacred distance into hidden history. It gives the unknown a body, a face, and sometimes, rather conveniently, a dramatic helmet. The stronger mystery may not require that. The ancient world already contains powers greater than any individual. The divine assembly, the flood, the temple, the archive, the mathematics of time, the demands of labour, the hunger for order, all these ruled human life before any single king could claim mastery. The pre-human ruler may be a way of speaking about forces that made humanity before humanity made history. You pause at the edge of a canal. The water moves slowly, brown and reflective. A reed boat passes, carrying bundles of cut plants. The boatman does not look like a servant of cosmic order. He looks tired, yet his movement belongs to a system of field, temple, ration, and river. He is inside an arrangement larger than his own intentions. That is how civilization often works. People experience it as daily life, while later generations call it a system. A woman grinding grain is not thinking about state formation. A scribe checking numbers is not thinking about the anthropology of authority. A child carrying water is not thinking about sacred kingship. Yet each action helps build the world that scholars will one day name. A scholarly debate continues over whether early Mesopotamian authority should be understood mainly through temple control, household power, ecological pressure, warfare, trade, or royal ideology. The strongest answers tend to avoid choosing only one cause. Cities are not born from a single spark. They're born from many pressures meeting in one place. That matters for the pre-human question. If rule is not only kingship, then what ruled before humans may have been pattern itself. The pattern of flood and planting, the pattern of lunar months, the pattern of offering and return, the pattern of labour and reward, the pattern of fear turned into ritual, and ritual turned into authority. The gods gave those patterns names. Enki named the deep intelligence of water and craft. Enlil named command, storm, and decree. Inanna named desire, power, conflict, and royal force. Nanna named the measured moon. These divine names did not merely decorate nature, they organized experience. They made the forces of life speakable. A name is a kind of throne. Once a force is named, it can be honoured, feared, invoked, and placed inside story. The invisible becomes social. The river becomes more than water. The moon becomes more than light. Kingship becomes more than politics. Humanity becomes more than labouring clay. You feel the old question changing shape. Who ruled before us? Perhaps the answer is not one figure waiting behind a curtain. Perhaps it is a whole architecture of powers, later remembered as gods, kings, sages, cities, and impossible reigns. The Sumerian records may not preserve a single lost monarch from a pre-human world. They may preserve the feeling that human order was never self-made. That feeling is ancient. It whispers that people did not invent the world they entered. They inherited river, sky, soil, hunger, death, birth, stars, seasons, and the terrifying need to live together. Civilization began when those forces were given buildings, names, rituals, numbers, and rulers. The throne came later. The rule was already there. Official history often sounds brighter than the ruins that produce it. It likes clean dates, labelled periods, confident maps, museum cases, and names printed neatly beneath glass. It prefers a timeline that behaves itself. First there is this culture, then that city, then a dynasty, then a collapse, then another empire rising with the usual confidence of people who have not yet met their own ending. The ground is less tidy. Beneath southern Mesopotamia, history lies in layers of mud brick, ash, pottery, reed impressions, broken walls, and tablets whose missing corners matter as much as their surviving signs. Archaeology does not uncover one smooth story. It uncovers interruptions. A burned room, a sealed jar, a rebuilt shrine, a foundation placed over something older. You kneel beside a trench cut into an ancient mound. The air is dry, and dust settles on your hands. The exposed wall shows bands of occupation like faint lines inside old wood. One layer holds pottery, another holds ash, another holds the remains of brickwork softened into earth. The city has become geology, and human life appears as a stripe in the soil. That is humbling. A mainstream historical fact rests here. Modern excavations at Mesopotamian sites have shown that cities were often rebuilt again and again on the same locations, creating large settlement mounds known as tells. Each level can preserve traces of houses, temples, streets, storage rooms, and destruction layers. But the record is always incomplete. Incomplete does not mean useless. It means careful. The archaeologist's brush moves slowly because the past can be destroyed while being revealed. A tablet pulled too quickly from the soil may crumble. A wall misunderstood may alter an entire interpretation. A small seal impression may change how scholars understand the trade. Authority, or ritual activity in a city that vanished thousands of years ago. The silence beneath official history is not empty. It is crowded with things not yet translated, not yet found, or already lost forever. A missing archive may have been washed away. A temple record may still sit beneath a modern village. A fragment may wait in a museum drawer, misread for decades until better imaging reveals a hidden sign. There is something almost ghostly about that. Not because the ruins are haunted in the cheap sense, with doors creaking for dramatic effect. The haunting is quieter. It comes from knowing that ancient lives remain present, but unreachable. Their walls can be measured, their jars can be drawn, their bones can be studied, yet their fears, jokes, prayers, and private doubts mostly remain sealed inside silence. A quirky fringe tidbit often grows from this silence. Some imagine that official history hides forbidden tablets describing lost rulers, ancient architects, or a secret timeline deliberately buried by priesthoods or modern institutions. There is no reliable evidence for a grand concealment of that kind. Still, the idea survives because real gaps exist. Missing evidence feels like a locked room, even when no one locked it. That is the danger of silence. It invites both humility and fantasy. Scholars debate not only what the evidence says, but what kind of questions it can answer. Some focus on economy, climate, and settlement patterns. Others study myth, ritual, feud, kingship, language, and the politics of memory. A growing number look at how environmental change shapes social pressure, because rivers, droughts, and soil conditions could be as decisive as armies. None of these approaches is enough alone. A broken tablet may speak of divine rule, a canal pattern may speak of labour organisation, a temple foundation may speak of sacred continuity. A seed sample may speak of farming choices. A child's burial may speak of tenderness, status, or loss. Together, they create a dim constellation rather than a full daylight scene. You stand at twilight near a sleeping ruin. The mound is quiet. Wind moves over its surface, lifting fine dust from broken brick. Nothing about it announces the mysteries underneath. A shepherd might pass without stopping. A bird might land on the remains of a wall once built for a god. The ancient city has withdrawn into the earth so completely that only patient attention can bring it back. Modern science has given that attention new tools. Ground surveys and meters reveal buried plans. Radiocarbon studies help frame dates. Residue analysis can identify traces of food, oil, or drink. Digital photography and three-dimensional scanning can read tablets whose surfaces are too damaged for the naked eye. The ruins are still silent, but instruments have learned to listen more closely. Even so, the deepest questions remain difficult. Who first connected kingship with heaven? How old were the oral traditions behind the surviving tablets? Did the pre-flood rulers preserve fragments of local memory, pure sacred imagination, or a mixture too old to separate? What did early audiences hear when those impossible reigns were spoken aloud? No machine can fully answer that. A scanner may reveal signs, but not the feeling of a scribe's world. A date may place a layer, but not explain why a city remembered itself as chosen. A restored line may recover words, but not recover the first voice that made them sacred. The official timeline is useful. It keeps us honest. It protects the past from becoming whatever the imagination wants it to be. It tells us which cities can be excavated, which tablets survive, which kings are historically attested, and which claims move beyond evidence. Yet the timeline is not the whole experience of antiquity. The ancients did not live inside our charts. They lived beneath heat, stars, divine obligation, hunger, hope, and fear of disorder. Their records were not created for modern textbooks. They were part of rituals, schools, offices, temples, and royal claims. Their world was not arranged for our convenience. That is why the silence remains powerful. Archaeology brings light, but not complete daylight. The beam falls on a tablet, a wall, a grave, a seal, a name. Around that beam lies darkness, not because scholars failed, but because time is vast and preservation is cruelly selective. You listen to the ruin breathing in the night. Official history says what can be responsibly known. The older mystery asks what the known fragments imply, and what they cannot bear to say clearly. Between those two voices, the ancient world becomes neither fantasy nor simple fact. It becomes a sleeping archive, and beneath its sounds, the first question still waits. The record ends, but the question remains awake. Not loudly, not like a door struck in the night. It remains like a small lamp in a room of clay, still burning after the voices have gone. The tablets do not give you one final answer. They do not name a single ruler and close the ancient case with polite satisfaction. They leave you with fragments, a city receiving kingship, a ruler with an impossible reign, a flood cutting time in two, a survivor standing at the edge of drowned memory, gods who govern through decree, water, labour, and the sacred pattern of the city, human beings shaped into service, then becoming more complicated than any divine administrator probably hoped. The oldest record is not a solved puzzle, it is a threshold. You stand again beneath the Mesopotamian sky, where evening cools the surface of the plain. The river moves in darkness, the reeds murmur along the banks. A temple mound rises ahead, softened by distance, no longer a building, not yet only earth. Above it, stars gather with the same calm indifference that watched the first cities learn to count. The air smells of dust, cooling mud and faint smoke. A mainstream historical fact still steadies the mystery. The Sumerians created one of the earliest known systems of writing, city life, administration, and royal memory. Their records do not prove every ancient claim literally, but they preserve the oldest surviving human attempts to place civilization inside cosmic time. That alone is astonishing. Humanity did not merely build walls and store grain. It asked where authority came from. It wondered whether rule began with people or descended from something greater. It looked backward and found not a simple beginning, but a darkness filled with names. Some of those names may be mythic. Some may be memories enlarged until their human shape disappeared. Some may be political inventions, dressed in sacred numbers to give cities prestige. Some may come from stories so old that even the scribes who copied them only inherited their shadows. A scholarly debate remains open around this delicate boundary. Historians, archaeologists, and language specialists continue to ask how myth, political memory, mathematics, and religious imagination worked together in the king lists and creation tradition. No careful answer destroys the mystery, it only changes its depth. That is the quiet dignity of ancient history. It does not need every possibility to be true. It needs only enough evidence, enough silence, and enough human longing to keep the question alive. The tablets are not loud. They do not beg to be believed. They wait while each generation arrives with new tools, new doubts, and the same old hunger to know what came first. A quirky fringe tidbit still lingers at the edge of the story. Some dreamers imagine that hidden tablets remain buried under forgotten mounds, carrying a complete account of rulers older than humanity. There is no proof of such a perfect lost archive. Yet the earth still holds unread records, and that's enough to keep imagination breathing. Somewhere beneath dust, a tablet may still sleep. Perhaps it contains only a receipt for barley. That would be very Sumerian, yet even a receipt can matter. A name, a date, a city, a seal, a divine title, a broken phrase. Any one of these can shift the line between known and unknown. History often changes not because a golden chamber opens, but because a small piece of clay says something no one expected. You look toward the horizon. The first question has softened now. Who ruled before us? Perhaps gods did, in the language of Sumerian sacred thought. Perhaps cities did, through temple and archive. Perhaps rivers did, by forcing people into cooperation. Perhaps numbers did, by teaching time to become order. Perhaps memory itself ruled, shaping the past into forms that could survive. Or perhaps the answer remains unfinished because the beginning was never simple. Civilization may have emerged from many powers meeting at once. Water, labour, fear, ritual, grain, sky, family, death, and imagination gathered slowly until human beings found themselves inside a world larger than any village. Then they looked upward and backward and said that kingship had descended from heaven. It is possible that this was not an evasion. It may have been the most honest language they had, because every society inherits forces it did not create. You did not invent the stars, the rivers, the body, the need for food, the fear of death, or the longing for meaning. The Sumerians did not invent them either. They gave them names, built houses for them, fed them, feared them, and pressed their traces into clay. The unfinished record is not failure, it is invitation, and now the story begins to loosen its hold. The plain grows darker, the last colour leaves the western sky. The river no longer reflects gold, only a slow ribbon of shadow beneath the stars. The temple mound rests quietly, no longer asking to be understood. It is enough that it remains. You can let the question become softer. You do not need to solve the first throne tonight. You do not need to decide whether the earliest rulers were gods, symbols, ancestors, or sacred memories wearing royal names. Let them stay where the tablets place them, At the far edge of time, beyond the flood, beyond ordinary years, beneath a sky that has forgotten nothing and explained very little, the clay cools, the reeds settle, the old cities sleep under their own dust. Somewhere in the dark, a scribe's hand presses one last sign into wet earth, and the mark remains long after the hand is gone. Wait. It carries no shout, no command, no final certainty, only the small, stubborn promise that memory can survive almost anything, so breathe slowly now. Let Eridu fade into the plain, let the long rains become stars, scattered and unreachable. Let the flood become only distant water, moving far away from you. Let Zeusudra stand in peace on the quiet shore. Let the gods return to their hidden council, where no human ear needs to follow. The night is wide. The old question can rest beside you without demanding an answer. It has travelled through clay, river, temple, number and dream. It has crossed thousands of years to reach this quiet hour, not to disturb your sleep, but to remind you gently that human history begins in wonder, and perhaps the oldest memory is still incomplete. Perhaps that is why it still feels alive. Good night.